Once the course has started and the initial learning innovation activities have been tested, it's normal to wonder if these activities are working and how. When can we say that a process of learning innovation is working? Let's go back to the definition of learning innovation. We have seen that learning innovation is a constantly evolving process that starts from the definition of goals. The objective is either improving and expanding the intended learning outcomes or improving the teaching experience for students and teachers. We have also seen how important it is to accompany a learning innovation experience with a careful monitoring activity, crucial to understand if the improvement goals are being reached and to collect elements to constantly recalibrate and improve the learning experience itself. In this perspective, the assessment of the effectiveness of teaching can start from quantitative data. For example, how many students passed the exam on their first attempt, what's their average score, etc. But it shouldn't end here. It's important to go beyond the areas related to the final assessment. We should definitely evaluate the perceived quality of the educational experience, both from the teachers and the students' perspective, obviously in terms of the intended learning outcomes. Another focus to observe is the development of transversal competencies. Thanks to the use of innovative approaches, in fact, it's easier to develop both core and the transversal competencies throughout the course. For example, those tied to the 4 C's: critical thinking, communication, cooperation, and creativity. These competencies are the ones that help students the most in positioning the content they have learned within their own knowledge system and use them in new and more complex contexts. To monitor the process of learning innovation, it's therefore necessary to provide a monitoring plan that investigates both quantitative and qualitative aspects. It also includes both formal and informal moments, gathering feedback and the voices of the class during and at the end of the course itself. In this video, we'll handle the quantitative aspect. The evaluation of a course often starts from a quantitative analysis. It is also helpful not only because it allows us to gather data that can be compared to other iterations of the course. Also useful to provide an initial measure response on how the activities are going and to send off warning signals. But what are the principal quantitative areas we should consider? The initial quantitative results are related to participation, intended both as the number of students that took part in the class compared to the students enrolled, and in terms of student participation in single activities. In terms of participation in general, the data must obviously be put in relation to the time period, the time of the day the course is, participation constraints or obligations, overlapping with other lectures, or the profile to the students themselves. If participation is low and organizational reasons have been excluded, it's useful to investigate the motivations and evaluate any rearrangements. If, for example, the course is too demanding for the students, also compared to the workload of other courses, to facilitate participation, it might be possible to consider a reconfiguration of the activities proposed, or redistributing lectures within a longer period of time. This experience should lead to fully recalibrating the course workload the following year. Another quantitative indicator tied to participation is related to participation in single activities. If results are not satisfactory, it's important to understand what the cause might be. There could be several different reasons. For example, the students may decide not to participate because they do not perceive it useful in respect to the intended learning outcomes or the final assessment, or they fear they might be negatively judged or penalized during the examination. In these cases, it might be sufficient to review the assessment of the activities or refocus the classroom agreement. Another fundamental quantitative indicator is collected at the end of the course, analyzing the exam results. This is the indicator that is traditionally associated with the success of the course. The topic of assessment is, however, quite complex. The interpretation of this information must take into account how the assessment was put together and how the final exam is structured. But be careful, if you want to evaluate the effectiveness of the process of learning innovation, this data should not be considered sufficient. It could be, in fact, necessary to observe and assess the output of the innovative learning activities supplied during the course, linking them, obviously, to the intended learning outcomes that were defined during the planning stage. One last collection of quantitative data comes from the analysis of the teaching assessment questionnaire, filled in by students and supplied by the institution. The results of this questionnaire can provide interesting information to better understand the learning experience, but they could also provide slightly misleading feedback, as it can be influenced by different factors. The resistance to change on the student's side, lack of communication from the educator in terms of innovative learning aspects, a high level of effort required compared to a traditional course, and so on. Especially in the initial tests, we can expect a decrease in the final assessment, even though the activities have been effective. There are 3 solutions we can put into practice to limit, reduce, or even cancel negative assessments. Pay attention to the communication of the learning path we are proposing and the assessment modes, initiating formal and informal dialogue with the class, and planning the activities that are closely linked to the intended learning outcomes and the assessment modes. All of these indicators are crucial to understand if a course has been successful. But being this a process, there are many different areas that the teacher can act upon. Because of this, it is important to provide more complexity and depth to the general picture through a qualitative analysis that can help us interpret all the quantitative data in order to understand what has worked and what hasn't, and why.